a sense of community when you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. Well, my guest today brings Indigenous stories to the media, which I think is pretty awesome. I'm very pleased to welcome her to the show, Kim Wheeler. Welcome, Kim.
Hello, Nancy.
First of all, thank you very much for accepting my invitation. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, of course.
So tell me about what you do exactly in more detail.
Oh, it's funny when people ask me that. I'm like, what do you do? I'm like, I do lots. um, because I'm an independent contractor. I do what pays the bills. And luckily for me, I do have some regular gigs and some really great gigs. One of the things that I do most is produce podcasts. So I produce Anti-Up, which is our tagline is Indigenous women talking about important shit. And we're actually just starting our third season. So you're the first to know outside of our team that we are going into season 3, which I think is really great. And then I'm also a contractor with Canada Land, and I produce a podcast called Canada Land Back. And that was just announced that we are going into a second season. So that will be launching in October. And I'm currently working on a radio series called Words and Culture, which looks at Indigenous languages across the country.
Very good. No, I know you've done some work in conjunction with CBC. Is that right?
Yeah, I actually got my start in radio at CBC. I began as a journalist in print, so working for newspapers. And then that was when I lived in Edmonton. And then in 2007, I moved back home to Winnipeg, where I was born and raised, and got a job at CBC in 2008, producing a summer radio series called Revision Quest. Our host was Daryl Dennis. And it looked at myth busting, those racist stereotypes held by people around Indigenous people.
Right. One of the reasons why I said I think it's very important that you bring these stories is because I know, as somebody who's obviously not Indigenous, that there's so many misconceptions out there, so many lies told, and so I really like to be part of bringing those truths to the world, really.
Yeah. And I think we need all the voices we can get because, there's only so much radio space to go around that, only, a few of us get to have our own radio shows on actual terrestrial radio stations, right? Like, and when I say terrestrial, I mean, when you go into your car and you turn on your radio, or when you're in your home and you flip on the radio, that's terrestrial radio.
Okay.
What you're doing, on the internet and on YouTube, I think is really great and really important because it's a whole new platform for all these Indigenous voices that wouldn't have had a platform before.
Right. Well, one of the reasons why I do it is an elder told me that I can't remember his exact words, but he said I was given a partial gift, maybe, to be a bridge between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people. And I didn't know, because he didn't explain it, right? And I thought, well, how could that work? And I thought, well, maybe my show might be a format. So I'm very pleased to be part of that.
Yeah, for sure. And it really is. And even though, like we always think about, who is listening or who is watching. For me, I always think, if it changes one person, if it opens like one person to I guess like new conversations or new horizons or new ways of thinking, then, I feel like we've done our job. So even if your viewership is small,
yes,
right, everybody has to start somewhere. Absolutely. And if you just change that one person, I think, I'm here for that.
Yeah, I agree, and I don't know how, other than on radio, like for me, my show goes on Tumblr, X, LinkedIn, as well. So that helps broaden the viewership a little bit, you know?
Yeah.
So I'm always trying to gain more so people would hear it. You know, I talked to I've forgotten his name, but he produced a show on APTN called Ocean Warriors, and he said like what he likes to do is bring stories that are positive stories about Indigenous people, so
Yeah.
that try to help take some of that negativeness away, right?
Yeah, Steve Sweethalt,
Yes.
you interviewed him. I actually interviewed him the week after you interviewed him for my Sirius XM show, the Kim Wheeler show. So I really love Steve. And yeah, I totally agree with him. That's what I've been doing for my entire career
Yeah.
is bringing, and that's my, that's my personal tagline is bringing positive stories to Indigenous and mainstream media since 1993. Because I saw, when I first went into journalism, that our stories weren't being covered and our positive stories weren't being covered. So I made that my mission um, to bring more positive stories to mainstream media, especially back in the day when there were, newspapers back in the 1900s, right?
Yeah.
when, when everybody got a newspaper, like we all got
Right.
newspapers delivered to our door. That was the way that we got our news because there was no internet, there was no social media, right? It was either television, radio, or the newspaper. And the newspaper was basically your on-demand reading, right? So the way we could turn on something like YouTube or social media, right? That was on demand because the newspaper was always there and you could pick it up whenever you wanted to. For television news, you had to be in front of your TV at 6 p.m. because back then also you couldn't really record the news either, right?
Right.
Until like the mid to late 80s when VCRs came out and you could record them. But who's really going to record the news back then? Everybody was recording their favorite movies.
Right. Yeah, yeah. The world is so different right now, right? You know, when I think about like Zoom, I can interview anybody no matter where they are in the world, which is changes everything, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
You know, one of the things that I think about, like what my colonial ancestors tried so hard to do and failed, because you're still here, you know.
Yeah,
I think about that, and I think, you know, it's hard. I know that some white people that, well, it's not my fault. Like they get very defensive about that, and I think you don't have to be defensive. Nobody's blaming you personally, but to acknowledge what was done, and then you can start making changes, right?
yeah, yeah. Um, and that's the thing. And changes can be really small too, right? They don't have to be something big and sweeping. It's, pick up a book or buy a book, listen to your show, listen to my show, watch a movie, something that is going to give you a view into our world that you didn't have before.
Yeah, for sure. I try to encourage people all the time to watch APTN, you know, which is where I learned about. Did I learn about you there? I can't remember now.
I don't know, maybe.
It could be now, but that's where I learned about Steve. You know, well, no, Steve was a friend of mine before that, but a Facebook friend rather. You know, so but it's like if you want to know about the people, go to the source, right?
Yeah, yeah,
So that's yours. That's yours. You're the source. So I
yeah.
think it's all very wonderful. So now do you have any other projects coming up? I mean, I know you're a very busy person.
Yeah. So I'm also a writer producer for the Juno Awards.
Oh,
Um,
hey,
and that's coming up March 24th in Halifax. So I'll be leaving here on the 20th to fly out there for the week. We've already started the writing process. We've started the production process. So there's lots of meetings because the team is although there's a core team in Toronto, there's a team that comes from across the country.
right.
And so I work with Insight Productions, and Lindsay Cox is the vice president and the executive producer for the Junos.
Mhm.
And she's just, she is so amazing. So this is an example of a really good ally to our community because Lindsay is white.
Yeah.
And she is very attuned to I don't want to say the needs because it's not the needs, but it's it is like what Indigenous people need to succeed in that arena, right? And then also she also takes into consideration um, what our cultural needs might be, right? So if we need, if we need to smudge, if the stages need to be smudged, right? Like she accommodates all of that. And she does it with such an open heart. And I think it's so great that she has, not only made space for Indigenous performers, but for Indigenous people to come on into those spaces, like into the writing room for the Juno Awards. So I'm just, I see Lindsay as an incredible ally to Indigenous people and to the the Indigenous music community.
Right. I love that. I think that's great. And one of the things you talked about when you said smudging and everything, one of the things like I'm learning about Indigenous people is you have such a wonderful culture, such a rich culture that I feel that our ancestors lost when they came here. I don't have a culture that I could identify with, whereas yours is so beautifully strong.
Yeah. What's your culture?
Well, European, my ancestors, when I did my DNA, it is like France and Spain and Portugal, those areas.
Yeah.
But I grew up, in a small little town in northern New Brunswick, French background on my father's side, English on my mother's side, but there's no strong, like I don't know how to explain it. Like I've been to one of the healing ceremony my friend Joe Charlie invited me to, and that's like, oh my gosh, that is such a beautiful, powerful experience. We have nothing. We like this us as well. You go see a psychiatrist if you have issues, dealing with your past, and it's not the same thing. I mean, you do it as a huge community.
Yeah. I feel I feel like the non-Indigenous community growing up, like in the 70s, was stronger.
Yeah. Yes.
That people, like Ukrainians celebrated Ukrainian Christmas. Um, like the Italians and the Portuguese, they all kind of had their own communities. Here in Winnipeg, we have a thing called Folklorama. So sorry, hang on a second, I have a cold.
Okay.
Every summer, they have performances and gatherings in different venues, and they really put their culture on display.
Okay.
I
Yeah.
feel like those communities, especially here in Winnipeg, were really strong back then, but maybe they've lost something over the last 50 years.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because, of course, for Indigenous people, our culture was outlawed, right? As we know, through the potlatch ban. And did you know that, back then that if more than 3 Indigenous people gathered, more than 3 First Nations gathered, that it was considered illegal and they could be arrested?
I didn't know that. No.
Yeah, and that's because they wanted to break those cultural gatherings.
Yeah.
So we couldn't practice ceremony, like we couldn't have the Sundance, or we couldn't do the Sweat Lodge, because then that would be more than 3 people gathering. And that was a way as well to rip us apart from, our cultural practices.
Right. Well, I read, I can't remember his name. His last name is King. I think it was similar called The Inconvenient Indian. And that's exactly how that you were treated, your people were treated. You were in the way of what the politicians of the day wanted, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you want a piece of land that they wanted, they're going to make your life miserable so that, and then they're going to make all these, I mean, sorry, I can go on for a long time.
Well, yeah, and I don't think that people realize just how much Indigenous people, and especially First Nations, endured.
Yeah.
I mean, right now people are learning about residential schools and still having a hard time believing that all the horrifying things that happened they don't want to believe that, because how could they live in a country where that happened to their fellow countrymen? They don't know about the 60s scoop yet. And of course, that's a time when, you know, they were taking young children, like literally stealing young children off the reserve, away from their families, and putting them in care and having them adopted out into white families. Now that happened to me as well. Like, I'm a 60 scoop adoptee
Okay.
as well. And raised in a white family, raised by a racist, abusive parents.
Right.
And it took me a really long time to reconcile that within myself, that I am Indigenous, that I'm First Nations, that I'm Ojibwe, that I'm Mohawk, and that I'm an Indian. And I couldn't even say that word, Indian, without cringing until I was in my probably early 30s,
Right. Wow.
because had been it, I'd been raised to believe that it was something really horrible to be Indigenous. But I overcame that. Lucky me.
Well, it's interesting because a First Nations friend of mine told me that he didn't know that when you went to any kind of restaurant, that getting a second cup of coffee was available, like a free coffee, free fill up was available until he went in with a white person. And it's like, wow. And I think about things like that, and I think of that, like, for me, if I saw something like that, then it's up to me to speak up, you know, to
Yeah.
the person that's doing that, to the First Nations people. Say something like, hey, why are you doing that to that person? I have First Nations relatives. So we always knew, by the way, well, we didn't know what we knew. We knew there was whispers about the way your people were being treated. Like when I grew up, I was born in the 40s, so the late 40s. So I remember we would talk about it, but we didn't know what we knew. So somebody was getting the word out really early on.
Yeah.
People,
Well, I think about what Justice Senator Mary Sinclair says, and that, that's, when our people were in residential schools being taught that we were less than, non-Indigenous people were being taught the same thing.
Yeah.
That we were less than, right? That they were better than us.
Yeah.
And that takes, as it takes 7 generations for us to recover, it also takes non-Indigenous people 7 generations to release that way of thinking.
Well, I'm pleased to say that with my brothers and sisters, we always felt that we were special because we have an auntie, or she's passed away now, but that we had an auntie who's First Nations, so we always thought we were special, which I think that's so cool, right? When I think about it, here's our special auntie, and she always treated us so like we were special. So that sort of brought it all home to us.
Yeah. Well, that's nice to hear.
Yeah, for sure. And so I was hoping to speak to her last time we went to see her, but she died the morning we arrived, and because I didn't know if she had been part of the residential schools or the 60s scoop. I didn't know any of that. All I knew is she was married to one of my mother's brothers, and I know her children are all adults now, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I just would have loved to have heard something from her personally, and I would have asked her, can I interview you or stuff like that. I just don't know. But anyway, I'm sorry, I'm rattling on.
I know.
I apologize. I just think that there's so much more I could talk about, but I do have another interview coming up, and I know you're a very busy woman, but I do appreciate you doing this with me. And I would, be happy if you ever want to come back on, and if you have something that you want to talk about or share or whatever like that, I'll be very happy to have you back.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Nancy. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. And to the audience, thank you very much. You've been listening to Kim Wheeler, and look her up. She's on Facebook. You're on Facebook.
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. I'm on Instagram.
Right. And again, it's important to hear the stories from the people themselves, from the First Nations people. So thank you, everybody, for watching. Take care and peace out.
a sense of community. Chilliwack's a place to be, a sense of community where you're free. Rolling through the mountains, rolling through the valley, rolling through paradise with me. It's multicultural, you're sure to see it all. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see. Come party in the park, go dancing after dark. Chilliwack's the place to be, you'll see.